Hi, I'm Liv and welcome back to the Book Nook. It's the 8th day of Vlogmas. Must not sing. The Book Nook is to you. And I'm doing a video that I toyed with leaving until the new year because it feels like it wasn't that long ago I did something similar to this, but I decided, sod it. So for this video, I will be answering some questions that the guys over at What Page Are You On Podcast answered in their latest episode. Now, What Page Are You On Podcast is a podcast run by the wonderful Alice Slater at Smoking Tofu and the equally wonderful Bethany Rutter at Bethany Rutter on Twitter, the two of those. And it's a brilliant podcast where these two guys just talk about books, and they've had themed episodes, and the last episode was themed around reading habits. Now, as I say, this is why part of me was like, oh, shall I leave this till the new year? Because it doesn't feel like that long ago that I did the reading habits tag video, but it was actually 6 months ago. Would you believe it? But it was a really interesting episode to listen to, and I think it was quite interesting listening to it. I was sort of answering in my own head, which is what I'll be doing in this, but out loud. And I was thinking about how things may have slightly changed for me since I did the reading habits tag 6 months ago. So I'm going to go through the questions. I have them here. What page are you on? Podcast episode 6, reading habits. I will naturally be leaving the link to the episode and to the podcast in general in the bit below. The thing. What's it called? So the first question, how many books have you read so far this year? How do you keep track? I've mentioned already before that I am heading towards 150 books, but I'm currently on 141 of 150 books. I don't know whether oh, come on. So I'm currently on 141 of 150 books, and I'm currently reading 2 books. And the thing I use to keep track is Goodreads on my phone. So there was a fair bit of discussion on the podcast about Goodreads and how you sort of use Goodreads, and do you use Goodreads and how far do you use it. And there's been a bit of discussion about the use of Goodreads as well, going around on BookTube. In general, there's been a few videos talking about, BookTube and reading, and I'll probably do some kind of chatty video about that at some point. But talking about the sort of use of Goodreads, but essentially all I use it for is just to keep track. I would love to actually write them down. I think would be a more kind of satisfying experience, I think, and would mean that you get less hyped up on the numbers, because I'm conscious that that is something I do, and more conscious of it this year than any other year, because I've been using it more religiously, as it were. But the reason I don't write them down is like I've always got my phone on me, whereas I know if I was keeping track of them on paper somewhere, I'd lose the bits of paper, and even if it was a particular notebook, I'd then halfway through the year decide to be using a different notebook, and I would just, if I had more of a set sort of diary tracker type thing, then I would possibly put it in there, and that's something I will possibly look to doing next year. But for the moment, for ease as much as anything, I use Goodreads. Next question is, one at a time, or do you jump between books? So in the reading habits tag, I said that I used to, when I was younger, jump between books. Now I tend to read just one at a time. But actually since then, I have been doing a little bit more jumping between books again. Partly because at the moment I am reading some fiction and some non-fiction, so I'm still reading Ali Smith's Winter and Nigel Slater's The Christmas Chronicles, and I think, if I was reading just one book, I would have finished probably Winter by now. But the fact that I'm reading 2 means that I've not finished either of them. But then I'm reading 2 good books, slightly slower, and getting different things from them all at the same time. So for me, it very much depends on the book as to whether I'm just reading solo or jumping between books. If I'm reading a bit of fiction and a bit of non-fiction, I'll do some jumping. If I am solely reading fiction, it will just be one book at a time in the main, but that may change next year when I slightly change my reading project, as it were, but more on that another time. Question number 3, do you push through to the end no matter what, or do you give up on books? Well, I always used to be a pusher on througher, never let a bad book die. In the last couple of years, since I've been working for the bookshop and just in general sort of changing slightly as a reader, I've been subscribing to the Life is Too Short for Bad Books and DNFing if I'm not enjoying it. But having said that, I think there's still a line that I struggle to cross. There are books that I have DNF'd this year that actually I probably could have DNF'd a lot sooner. Or there are also some books that I probably, if I was stricter with DNFing, would have DNF'd, if you get what I mean. Some books I seem to have read because I was more of the way through than not. So there's still definitely a line that I'm not quite okay with crossing when it comes to DNFing, but I'm definitely not someone now who will push on with a book if I'm absolutely hating it, but I'm possibly still the kind of person who will push on with a book if I'm just not loving it. So that line is still there. Question number 4, where and when do you tend to read? Where and when do I tend to read? So I've got my book nook set up, and in the main I try to read here, but life gets in the way. So a lot of the time actually at the moment I'm reading in bed more than I'm reading anywhere else at the moment. Purely because I come home from work, I'm absolutely knackered, I sit down on the sofa and watch a bit of telly, then I have some dinner, then I'm procrastinating and doing stuff, or I'm doing little bits of work that I've got to finish off at home, and things like that, and then I go up to bed and I sit and read in bed for a couple of hours. So at the moment I am actually reading in bed more than anywhere else. That will all change again, I think, when I get my new chair. My chair is arriving on Saturday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, soon. So I think that will change again as to where I read most. When it comes to when, obviously, if I'm in bed, it's before I go to bed. It's before I go to sleep is where I tend to do most of my reading. I don't have much of a commute, so I'm not a commute reader. And even if I did have a commute, I'm so not a morning person that literally on the way to work, it's all about just trying to make myself conscious. So I'm definitely not a reader in the morning. What's your ideal reading session setup? Well, the ideal one is just low level, maybe some candles going, nice smells of either coffee or some nice scented candles or some nice food or something like that. Just low level lighting, peace, quiet, and sitting to read. And that's ideal. So that doesn't really often happen quite like that. Do you reread books, or do you reread books, and what's your most reread book? I'm not much of a rereader actually, and I think in this last year I've been wishing I was more of a rereader. I've been seeing a lot of videos and a lot of people talking about books that they either are rereading or ones they have historically reread a lot. And I haven't really reread books since I was a kid. I'd say, on that note, my most reread book would be all of the Harry Potters. I haven't done a complete reread through for a while, and I think that's something I might treat myself to next year. And a few other books sort of when I was a kid. Fleabag and the Firecat, I reread that one a lot. And just a few books when I was a kid would be ones that I've reread. Not reread a book in a while. A lot of it is because I don't have all of the books from when I was a kid. And I think I had a cull before I went to uni, or possibly midway through uni, and was like, no, I'm not keeping all of these, and got rid of a load. Kept some that were sort of special, and some Sweet Valley High books, obviously. But I haven't kept all of them, so I haven't got some of the ones that I would possibly go back to. And because I went for quite a while of not reading for a little while in my life, or not reading as much, there's not much I've reread, and I've never been a huge rereader. I think because I am so conscious of the new and the new exciting thing, and discovering things that are new to me and finding something new, say new a few more times, that I haven't been much of a rereader, but I do sometimes wish I was more of a rereader. How do you mark your place? I use an assortment of bookmarks because they're often free. At work, publishers send, stacks of free bookmarks to give away to customers with books, and often I'm in work, I buy a new book and I pick up a bookmark there. So it's usually sort of publicity material type free bookmarks that have nothing to do with the actual book I'm reading. I have a few nice bookmarks, but I tend not to actually use them because I'm scared of losing them or damaging them, so they just sit in a pot. I always used to just use bits of paper, but I can't really do it now. The other night I'd taken a new book up to bed and I'd forgotten to take a bookmark up with me, and I had a little notepad in my bedside drawer, and I tore out a bit of paper and put it in the book and tried to put it down and go to sleep, and genuinely had to come downstairs and get a bookmark. Do you use an e-reader? Well, if this question had been in the reading habits tag 6 months ago, I would have said yes, because I was using an e-reader a little bit more. I got myself a Kindle, used Kindle Paperwhite as much as anything because I have the ability to get lots of digital proofs, galley copies from NetGalley and things like that, and I was using it for a spell. I was using it a fair bit, and I did quite enjoy using it, and there is something about it that, even though I've always been in my head so anti-e-reader, there was an ease to it, and I did quite, so I don't think enjoy is quite the right word, but I didn't hate using it. But recently I've just not been using it because I've got so many good physical books that proofs that I've got digital copies of. I've often sort of applied and got a digital copy, and then I've been sent a physical copy as well, so I read the physical copy. So yeah, it's not something that I tend to use so much at the moment. Who knows what will happen with other books in the future. How do you decide what to read next? So, a lot of people use TBRs, and this was a lot of what the conversation was about in the episode is, do you have TBRs or do you whim it? Mainly, I try to whim it, but I always have, if not a physical stack of books that I want to read soon, I have in the back of my head, these are some books I want to read soon. And I will usually keep a stack of books. I usually have a shelf of books that are my current hauls, and I keep them in one place until I've done the haul video, and then I mix them in with where they should live. So I tend not to try and give myself a TBR because I think I would succumb to TBR pressure a lot. I would have guilt if I picked a book off of another stack of books, one that wasn't on my TBR, but I want to have the freedom to kind of go, well, this is what I feel like reading at the moment. But I do think there is some validity to having TBRs, because then actually you can keep track of, well, these are ones I wanted to read for this reason, and when I got this one I was really excited about it. And actually, if you just get a book and you're really excited about it, and then you put it on your shelf and you've got loads of other books that you're really excited about, you can kind of lose track sometimes. And that does happen occasionally. And when I was moving all my books around and putting them back on the shelves, there were a few on the shelf. I was like, oh my god, yeah, I got that one and I was so excited to read that one. Why haven't I read that one yet? I tend to go by whim. Where do you buy books? So it'll come to no surprise to you guys that I buy all my books pretty much exclusively from Waterstones, because I get a 50% staff discount. But I do buy some secondhand books, sometimes online, or if I've got the opportunity to pop into a secondhand bookshop, I will pick up a couple in there as well. But yeah, pretty much exclusively from Waterstones. Which bookshop sections do you like to browse? Fiction. Always like to have a little look at fiction, just to see how they've got things set up, obviously like A to Z, but I just like to look at bookshops, what tables they've got and how they've sort of grouped things and what displays they've got going on, so I like to have a little look at that. Again, a lot of it at the moment, my browsing is kind of tied in with working. A lot of the time when I go to a bookshop, it's looking at it going, oh, what ideas could I bring from this bookshop to our bookshop and things like that. So it is hard, I think, sometimes. Not hard, like life is hard. Sometimes it's tricky, I should say, to browse a bookshop as a reader or a shopper as opposed to someone who works in bookshops. Sometimes I find that a little hard to separate from. But having said that, that's mainly the case when I go into larger bookshops, so other branches of Waterstones, the bigger foil stores, bigger independent stores. But a lot of the time when I go into small indies, like when I was doing that bookshop tour with Alice, that they're so different and they're so quirky that it is just a whole sort of new world. But in terms of the sections I like to browse, it is mainly fiction that I do like to have a little look at, just to see what they're doing with their fiction section. I'll usually have a little check out of the sort of politics section. A lot of the time at the moment, I'm looking for, have they got like a good gender studies section? Have they got something about women and female writers and things like that, and own voices and BME writers and things like that? I'm always just on the lookout for kind of responsible book selling in a way, I guess. But also just as a reader, those are the kind of things that I am drawn to. Do you judge a book by its cover? Oh, hell yes. Hell yes. Again, they talk about this a little bit in the podcast, and there is this whole thing, we work in a bookshop and never judge a book by its cover. But people are paid to design book covers. People are paid to design books. Some of them are bad. Some are really bad. Some are amazing. And I think a good book cover somehow sums up what's in the book just by looking. So you're supposed to. Don't judge a book by its cover is kind of a bit like saying, oh, I don't know. Don't judge food by what it looks like. But if you've got a rotten apple and it looks rotten, you're not going to go, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine, I'll eat it anyway. Oh, you do judge things. We are visual creatures at the end of the day. There are a lot of things that you can't do without that visual link. So of course, I think anyone who says they don't judge a book by its cover is lying. At least to themselves. I think we don't always want to. Of course you don't. You don't want to. And there are good reasons sometimes why you shouldn't, because sometimes, as I say, book design is all wrong. Jacket designs are totally incongruous with what the book is, and quite a few authors and writers have said themselves sometimes that they hate the designs of their jackets, of their books, and they don't think it works. So of course it can happen, but as I say, we're visual creatures. We are drawn to things. We're drawn to pretty things that look nice, things that tick our boxes. So yeah, I definitely do. every day when the books come in. Do you own multiple editions of the same book? Yes, and it isn't an accident. So I've got multiple editions of George Saunders' Lincoln in the Bardo, as you guys will have seen, I think, on Instagram. So I've got the UK hardback, the Waterstones exclusive hardback, the UK proof, and a copy of the American hardback. And I will, of course, be getting the UK paperback when that comes out, and if the US paperback is any different, I may look into that. I don't know. I've got multiple editions of Harry Potter, so I've got my original copies. I've got 1 to 3 in paperback and 4 and up in hardback. Then I have got the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff 20th anniversary house editions, and then I've also got a box set of the new adult covers of Harry Potter. I got them because actually I do quite like the new adult covers. I hated the old adult covers, the old ones that came out at the same time as the kids covers. They looked a little bit like the 50 Shades of Grey covers look now. They were all like black with like a jewelled thing from whichever book it was, and they were all just a bit like, okay. But the new adult covers, I think, have got a good balance between sort of keeping that spirit of what the books are about, but also going, oh, it's not a kid's book, so it won't have a picture of a wizard on it. Do you lend your books to people, and if so, are you particular about their condition when people return them? I tend not to lend books. I will only lend books if I don't really want them back, and in that case it's not really lending them, it's gifting them with, oh, well, if you finished it and you don't have anything to do with it, I'll have it back. But I have been burned before, I think, is my reasoning for that. The worst person for it is my mother. I've always been of the opinion that if someone lends me a book, I'm a caretaker of it, I'm looking after it, and if something happens to it, you should always give it back to the person in the particular condition that it was given to you, I think. So if someone has given you a book that they have read, and it is pristine, and it's in really good condition, then that shows you that that is how they like their books to live. So if you read that book and it gets run over by a car or spilt coffee on it, then you buy them a new copy. That's just me. It's kind of a case of do unto others as you would have done unto you, isn't it? Oh, I went biblical. That was unexpected. But yeah, if someone gives you a book in a particular condition, then you should return it in that condition. That's partly why I don't lend people books, because I have been burned before by people not giving them back to me in the same condition. And I would just always rather, if there's a book I really love and think somebody else would really love, I'd always just rather buy them a copy, because then it's theirs, and if they don't like it, they can do whatever they want with it. They can pass it on or whatever. But if there's a book that I've loved, that book is the book that I have loved. Yes, we could have a whole conversation about books as physical objects, and they touch on that in the podcast a little bit. But for me, the physical object, the thing that you read, is so intrinsically tied to the book and to the reading of it that, yeah, if I love a book and really want to recommend it to somebody, I'd rather just buy them a copy. If they can't afford it themselves, I'll buy them a copy of it. I would much rather do that. Plus, then they get a gift. That's always nice. Do you write in your books? No, I do not. Part of that's because I don't actually really have a reason to. A lot of people will like to sort of keep track of notes and things for writing reviews and things, or for talking about them on BookTube. I tend not to, and maybe that's not particularly a good thing. Maybe that's poor content that I will then thus deliver. And maybe I will start, potentially, if not writing in books, then using post-its and notes, particularly next year, again, with what I'm thinking of doing for reading for next year, which I will talk about, I promise. But no, I don't write in books at the moment. I think there are valid reasons to do so, but I just often think you could probably just write it in a notebook alongside it. But then, some people like to write in books without having a reason, because the reason is writing in it and keeping notes of particular passages you love and things like that. But yeah, for me, I tend not to. So, those are the questions that the guys over at What Page Podcast sent over to me, and they were the questions that they asked each other in the latest episode of What Page You On Podcast. As I say, I will link to that down below. I cannot recommend that podcast highly enough, by the way. Not just because I know Alice, but because it is just genuinely a good bookish podcast. The two girls sit in a room and talk about books around a theme, and it's fun, and it's intelligent, and it's fiercely passionate about books. So yeah, if you're looking for another bookish podcast to listen to, you can't go wrong with that one. And as I say, this is kind of just an expansion on the reading habits tag, and I did do that 6 months ago, so I was a little unsure as to whether to do this now or wait until the new year. But as I say, I think it's quite an interesting thing to think about and continually, not examine, but just be aware of and be conscious of, is how do you read. And so I just think it's quite an interesting thing to be aware of and constantly sort of look at. Not constantly like, how am I reading? But just, just checking in. So yeah, I've had quite a bit of fun thinking about how things have changed in terms of reading habits over the last 6 months. Not, drastic shifts, nothing seismic, but yeah, a couple of little changes. And I think that will continue to happen as I continue to grow as a human being. So if you're interested in examining your reading habits, there's the reading habits tag. I will link my old video of that down below as well. Or you can have a go at answering these questions from the podcast. And as I say, listen to the reading habits episode because there's a lot to think about in there. And there was a lot that as the guys were talking, I was thinking, oh, do I do that? Do I not do that? So yeah, hope this was worth watching. I had fun doing it. You will see me tomorrow on the 9th day of Vlogmas. Bye.